Hello. Today I'll be explaining how to prove that sin exists or sins exist in our lives. So there has to be some kind of feedback in the external environment to show that there's a correlation that if we continue in immorality, that bad events will increase in our life not associated with that immorality. So I've talked about this before in other videos about what sin is. So I've included a secular section explaining, leading up to that conclusion of what sin is, or sins, plural. And I have another section on how God is against sin, the correlation of God that is against sin. So I have that section. So we'll look at both of those fairly quickly, and just to show that God's against sin. So starting off, if you open up your heart, this is metaphorical, and the best way I can explain this, you will receive a guilty conscience about the past immorality committed. So this is what we describe as guilty conscience, and this is uncomfortable in the mind. Even one can get a guilty conscience of what is not based on morality. This includes the following four, which is cussing on one's own, getting drunk, bowing down to other gods, or dealing with the occult. And so the guilty conscience will be there about those four. But those four are not based on morality. So if you get a guilty conscience from committing these four above, then you need to explain why you're getting the guilty conscience. Yeah. So if you blatantly continue in sin or in immorality for a month, bad events not associated with your immorality will increase. This includes the four above. They're not based on morality. Yeah. And I'll go into more details about the next section. I talk about how to specifically reduce the biases on this. So after you confess all of your immorality and stop continuing in sin, or immorality, actually, you can think about an immorality in your mind before you even act on that immorality. You'll receive a guilty conscience of that immorality in the mind. So that guilty conscience will be there. Since there is an uncomfortable sensation of committing the four above not based on morality, you must confess each one and that guilty conscience will go away. Yeah, so if you do the following, bad events not associated with that immorality will increase. Yeah. If the bad event is associated with that immorality, then it is a bias. So it should not be associated. If one receives a guilty conscience of what is not based on morality, such as cussing on one's own, the four, then this is the first statement. If one blatantly continues in sin or immorality for a month, bad events not associated with your immorality will increase. So the intensity or frequency or quantity of bad events will increase in your life. So this includes what is not based on morality. This is the second statement. So if the first statement and the second statement are true, then this shows that someone or something is intervening in your life, because the logic of statement one and statement two should not be there, but it is. And enough people need to do statement one and statement two to confirm that these two are factual. Another way is to blatantly continue in this immorality for a month, not associated with immorality will increase. So I'll go into more details about that in the next section. So we'll look at that as well. So there is someone or something intervening to make this logic happen. And so yeah, so the guilty conscience was not based on morality, intensity or quantity of bad events increasing because of the immorality committed is actually God. So statement one, statement two, and the following is it's actually God. Therefore, God is against sin. And we can use the word sin. So thus the snares got down to the one who's against it. Yeah, so I've talked about that before, but I have another section describing the correlation. If I can get to that one. Let's see. One blatantly, so this is the correlation of God against sin. So if one blatantly continues to sin, bad events not associated with their sins will increase. If this is correlated, then this is obviously a bias. So I'll give an example of if one gets drunk, a sin, drives and gets into a car crash, a bad event, then this is a bias. I go into more details. I think I've talked about this before. I did, but I have more details about this. So I've created a graph of a positive correlation of sins committed, the bad events committed versus, the bad events that occur versus the sins committed. So if no bad events happen in a person's life, 1.0 is a bad event. Causes death to a person. So the start value of 0.1 is arbitrary. And that start value is yet to be determined. Slope values are also arbitrary and yet to be determined. So I have this in a graph. Slope value is unknown, of course. The data points will cluster around the blue dotted line, expected values seen in figure 1 if there's a correlation. So highly correlated graph of intensity of sins committed, then the intensity of bad events will increase in one's life. So this is positive correlation. If it is not correlated, if the intensity of sins committed do not follow the trend line of intensity of bad events. Yeah. So here's an example of not correlated, so uncorrelated. Intensity of sins committed, it's random when you don't commit a sin. And then if you commit a sin, nothing bad happens, essentially. Not correlated intensity of sin, especially this correlation. This cluster. The only way to prove there is a correlation of the intensity of sins committed resulting in intensity of bad events increasing is for a person to do this on their own. Yeah. But a majority of people will say that this is working, that there's a correlation. So if one does not continue in sin, intensity of bad events will go down. Though from experience, the worst intensity of bad events was about 0.1 out of 1. Yeah. Intensity of bad events of 1 is you died, and 0 means nothing bad happens. The number 0.1 is arbitrary. But the focus is actually on the intensity of bad events are low when no sins are committed. Yeah, so this is true. So again, the only way to prove this baseline is for each person to do this on their own. Ideally, you want 0.0, but from my experience, that's not the case. Here's the baseline. So maximum 0.1 when not committing any sin. And so I've talked about this before, but bad events include getting into a car accident, someone did a hit or run in your car, your computer with all your valuable files on it stopped working, your wife leaves you, you lose your job, you're demoted at work, your rent goes up more than usual, quality of your work at your job goes down, you have plumbing problems at your house, the internet stops working, someone threatens your life in person for no reason, you receive a disease, etc., etc. So those are bad events for a month while blatantly continuing in sin. So this is just a formal proof. If people understand that God is against sin, then don't do this. So if bad events associated with a sin, just ignore it. So for the second month, and also just write it down in your journal. And so for the second month, if you do not continue in sin and all the sin, bad events will reduce significantly in your life, right? Every bad event that happens down in your journal for that second month and the first month. So you'll see the correlation you'll see the difference between the two, comparing the two. You'll see that if you blatantly continue to sin, bad events will increase that's not associated with your sins. Therefore, there's a mechanism that's happening in the background where if one blatantly continues to sin, bad events not associated with that sin will increase in one's life. So you can see that mechanism is a God who is against sin. And so to reduce the the variability in the environment that can influence this outcome, you can also blatantly cuss on your own privately for a month straight, while not continuing in other sins, and bad events not associated with cussing on one's own will increase. Write every bad event that happens down in your journal for the first month. A bad event can be the following, but not limited to what I've said before. Write those bad events down for a month while blatantly continuing in sin of cussing on your own privately for a month straight. If a bad event is associated with the sin, which it shouldn't, if you cuss on your own, just ignore it. And for a second month, do not continue in sin and all the sin. Bad events will reduce significantly in your life. Write every bad event that happens down in your journal for that second month. And so if you compare the two of the first month and the second month, you'll see that if you blatantly cuss on your own privately, bad events will increase that's not associated with that sin. Therefore, there is a mechanism happening in the background where if one blatantly continues in sin, bad events not associated with that sin will increase in one's life. So you can say that mechanism is God who is against sin. And this does not prove his name in this section, but yeah, don't rely on other people's testimony. Just observe, write down in your journal on your own, especially this one. There's a correlation that God is against sin. So that's how you prove that God is against sin. And thank you. I'll come out with more videos, and thank you.